Fans, thanks for joining us once again on this special episode, part two, featuring Randy Nanjad. And I were talking about the Muppets the other day and the correlation between the iconic, I don't know, what is the difference? A combination of a mop and a puppet? Is that how it went? But anyway, you know, the parallels that, we're getting into a good conversation. Then all of a sudden, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we got cut off there. So we're picking it up once again, re-upping, as they say. And I think we had talked through some scenarios, who would put in the ring. One of the viewers of the episode said, why hadn't we put in Sweetums as a boxer in the ring, given his size, stature, as I guess super heavyweight. But anyway, where were we? We were talking about the parallels, actually. We're talking about the parallels between the Muppets and boxing in general, and you were talking about the viewpoint, if you will, of how the Muppets was shot from the viewpoint of the Muppet. You became a Muppet yourself.
Yeah.
And you were drawing that.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of intimacy that comes from the Muppet Show, and you see the same thing in boxing, right? So many of the Muppet shots were done not only, it's one thing to be let backstage, and we get that sometimes when we get back into the boxers' dressing rooms or other things like that, and of course the ringside reporting. But really, it's that moment where you're seeing it from the camera's pointing at different boxers, but it's almost like a point of view moment. It makes it so intimate. And the Muppet Show does the same thing, right? They shoot from the stage and from the audience and from backstage, and so all of a sudden you become a Muppet. Like, you're just immersed in this world. There's the conceit is you're just one of them. You're just part of this whole thing, and along the way, and the Muppets have broken that fourth wall in the same way so many times. It's what I love about boxing, right? There's no barrier between fan and fan and gladiator, fan and participant, fan and trainer. All of these things come out a lot. And then, there's three other things that really come out that parallel. In boxing, like in the Muppets, there's a role for every archetype. Whether you're, the Muppets, sometimes you're animal, you're food, you're a monster, you're whatever. You've got all kinds of different personalities, and there's a role for you everywhere, even if you're a weirdo, whatever, one-off, right? Boxing has the same set of archetypes, right? You could be the bad guy, the good guy, the guy who comes from a poor neighborhood, a guy who came through the system and was privileged to get there. And once you're in that ring, you belong. And as an audience, you belong in there with them. And it doesn't change. So it really draws you in that way, in that type of intimacy, a way that other sports don't. The other two parallels that I see between the Muppets and boxing, and this is one of my favorite ones, in the Muppets as well as in boxing, chaos is incredibly difficult to do well. So to create the flurry and fasting that makes boxing compelling, and it takes extreme discipline and openness to coaching and feedback, in the same way that Jim Henson and the rest of the Muppet team, really would work for hours on end. They joke about what they used to call Jim Henson hours, because if you didn't get the shot right, if you didn't feel comfortable, you just went at it again. And there was, as much fun as they were having, there was just such an extreme discipline to the work that they were doing. So it might look chaotic for those watching in, but for those players, there is a clear set of rules, a clear set of disciplines, a clear 2-3 moves ahead that you're playing out as you go along, which is really quite exciting. And the last one is, and I drew this out from an interview with Frank Oz talking about Miss Piggy, is that the joy and humor from the sport is derived from the trauma and sadness in the life of its practitioners who are doing the work of the sport and the work of society in the ring, right? And so Frank Oz talked about how Miss Piggy knows who she is in society. She knows she's not good looking. She knows she's all of these things. But while she's working through that, that's where the humor comes out of. And I think you see that in the boxing ring. There's that drama isn't as derivative as it is in some sports. It's there because these two people in the ring are going to be playing out not only their sport, but also their lives, in this very bare sort of area, this platform that they've got, this pedestal on. So those four things really came out. as parallel between the Muppets and boxing for me as I looked at things.
Yeah, I agree certainly with well, all your points, but specifically the team element. Not a lot of people will understand the team element, not only creating the Muppet Show in this case, or any show, but also the show that's involved in putting on an event where two fighters go head to head. There's an awful lot of teams that are involved, whether it be the production team, whether it be the actual team that's trained that fighter to get into the ring. And there's an awful lot of characters that are involved in these teams. Some meld, some don't. Some get along, some don't. And I was going to ask you in part one, while we were separated there, so I was asking myself, what about these human resource characteristics that are required to build these teams? Specifically, if you have a fighter who is, say, I don't know, let's say he's selfish. He or she is selfish. Thinks he or she doesn't need a team, can do it all on their own. I mean, that's something you can probably draw in terms of a parallel from the Muppets as well, because none of those people worked in isolation. Even if you take a look at Waldorf and Statler, they were always criticizing, always lambasting their own show. So I think it's kind of funny, but there are some parallels to be drawn. But on the serious side, given your professional background in human resources, surely you must see that in the boxing world, there's going to be issues with certain boxers being able to work within a team environment.
Oh man, I see this all the time, and it's actually something I'm working on right now, because you actually see it at its finest at the CEO or the C-suite level in general, right? Where they spent all of these years, and they, especially those who built their own business, kind of cultivating this thing, and they're like, well, I want to let this go, or I want to hold on to this, or nobody can do this as right as me, and it takes such coaching and coaxing and working to try to let them let go of the things that they think they know, the things that they need to hold on to, so that they can be open to it. And I think the most successful fighters, you see that, right? They're constantly listening, they're constantly learning, they're constantly playing out. Okay, wait a minute, that is not for me anymore. That's something else. And so yeah, you're alone when you get in the ring, but the series of negotiations that have happened to get you there, not just with you as your trainer and you and the promoter and you, like, there's a whole series of other negotiations. I liken it to, just like I do in human resources, I liken it to Chinese checkers as opposed to chess, right? Where, you get to make your move, but then you got to wait for 5 other players to go before you get to move again. And by the time you've moved, all these plans you made in your head are completely moot because the board's completely different. 5 other people have moved, all the pieces are in a different place, and the strategy that you thought you had is different. And your only way to succeed is to look at it again and see the whole board. And I mean, that works in both boxing and HR that way, right? You're constantly shifting pieces and then looking at what's open and then playing that. And I think it's almost an underappreciated piece of the sport, how many moving pieces there are, as you say, to an event, but just to a boxer himself, right? To that one person, all of the different things that that you see, those who are surrounding them, but also then beyond that, the things that you have to create. There's small technologies, little bits of this and that. Somebody, every piece of technology that comes to the sport is because somebody thought about something for this one person and then broadened it out. And the same thing works in HR, right? I often face, hey, there's this one situation that I got to deal with, and it gets me thinking, wait a minute, so is there a larger policy at play? Like, when I shake that out, what sand's falling out of the carpet, right? And what do I need to create to make that happen? So yeah, the sport parallels in a lot of different ways that way.
Without a doubt. I mean, someone who has been a CEO, I know that intimately with respect to working with different personalities and getting different people to understand where they fit in the grand scheme of things. It's not all about them per se. It's about being able to interact with all these different people and all their different personalities to come up with this, if you will, singular event, to come up and face the reality that, yeah, okay, in this particular case, if we're talking about boxing, it does end up with two people, well, actually three people in a ring because there's a referee in there too. But at the end of the day, as a CEO, I'm starting to see in the world of boxing, having spoken over the past 6 months via this Talk and Fight network, having spoken to all the various individuals who are in the ring, as well as referees, as well as administrators, as well as people who are running organizations. Um, there are issues right now within the world of boxing because at one point there were egos who did control boxing, and they're very identifiable. We know who they are, but the world of boxing is moving into more of a team generated environment where you recognize it's not just about the individual going into the ring and how can we maximize that individual's fight, for example, or that individual's skill. It's now very much a team-based effort where there are nutritionists involved, there are doctors involved, there are therapists involved, let alone the managers and the administrators in these organizations that are very now team focused on maximizing the output, if you will, of those individual fighters.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's funny. I love the idea of the ref being an HR guy, right? He or she walks into the middle of this thing, sets the rules, says, "All right, so here's your onboarding. Here's all the things you need to know. All right, go do your work." And every once in a while, has to come like, "Hey, stop for a second. I just need you to think this through. Okay, take a 4 count. All right, get back in there. All right, hey, wait a second. All right, someone else has to have it's so funny. Their role, the ref's role, is so much like an HR person, which is kind of a funny parallel. I just thought of as you were talking. But the interesting thing in all of the people that we think about what makes a fighter, the fan really is one of the ones that I think we sometimes forget about, the way that they shape a fighter too, right? I think, I read a study that was done by Sebastiano Moreau that was published in the Journal of Sport Business Research just in 2020, in which he broke down, I think it was about 9 motivations for why a boxing fan watches the sport, right? And it's not all just about the spectacle. It's not all just about the pugilism. For some, it is about the nutrition. It is about the science. It is about this, that, and the next thing. All of which I think at some point gets back to the fighters themselves and begins to influence who they are and how they think about the sport. Because there is, again, that intimacy, like I talked about before, between fan and practitioner that really makes that work.
Have you actually done uh, any work in any sports organization to try and delve into what drives the athlete, what is in this case what drives the boxer, let alone you just touched on what drives the fan, in terms of the personalities that are involved and all the other, now we're seeing other personalities are also involved in creating that fighter, the team that we just mentioned. But I'm just kind of curious, have you read any studies or participated with any other organizations who are looking at what drives or motivates, in this case, the boxer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Not professionally. This is actually a personal passion of mine. I mean, I love sport. Haven't been a sport that I didn't like. But what I love is the science and history and the audience study part of it. And so even that sports psychology, right, around, what drives somebody to this kind of discipline, what kind of motivates that work. And I think the most insightful thing that I read, I think it was Norman Mailer who wrote it. I was reading The Fight. And I don't know if Mailer himself wrote it or somebody writing about Mailer writing The Fight wrote about this, but the line is that passion is an outcome, not a driver, right? You do the things that make you excited about your life, and what comes out of that is passion. Outside, and we talk about athletes being the other way around, right? They have a passion for the sport. No, the sport has driven a passion inside of them. The work that's being done, both the strategy and the workouts and and all of the other pieces, drives a passion in them that leads them to do it more. But you see it. You see this in movies. I love this particular component of Hilary Swank film, and I can't remember.
Yes.
Million Dollar Baby, right? You see this in
Thank
Million
you.
Dollar Baby, right? Right. Where, Swank's not passionate about boxing when she starts. She's passionate about herself. She's wanting to exercise these things about her body, these things about her confidence, these things about, the society around her, the opportunity to overcome people saying no. That's what drives her. And as she invests more and as her coaches invest more and as more opportunities, the passion from that starts to drive out and more opportunities start to drive out. That's essentially the big theme of Creed as well. And you see this in Creed 2, right? Ryan Coogler does a great job of taking what Rocky 3 started and building on that, right? About, in Rocky 3, Rocky loses passion for the sport and has to find his way out of it to be able to have this fight with Clubber Lang. The same thing in Creed 2, right? The passion doesn't come from the sport itself. It comes from all of these things that he's realized are outside of the sport that are now going to drive and materialize inside of him. I think that's kind of where athletes live today. And it's again, it's not something that we talk about because we talk about passion being something innate.
It's funny you mentioned Rocky 3 because one of my own Facebook posts when I was preemptively talking about this particular show with you was Rocky 3 actually used the Muppet Show as part of its promotional campaign. Uh, Funny little segue there, but I was going to ask you, what the heck did the Muppet Show have to do with Rocky 3? Do you know?
So the great moment, it's actually right from the beginning of Rocky 3. It's that scene where Rocky's working out in that super floofy gym and there's no like he's not really working out. It's all about the spectacle and things like that. And I think what they were trying to do, I mean, this is just me being a Muppet researcher now talking, right? But what I think they were trying to do is parallel this idea that there's a storyline here about how Rocky's lost his way. And instead of being a fighter who is driven again by these innate things that create a passion, that's this really just it's about this funny spectacle little thing, and he's got to find his way back from it. And other than that, I mean, the Muppets are open to everybody, right? They were a vehicle. The Muppets, before they were even a show, they were a vehicle to advertise. Kermit existed well before the show. He used to advertise for something called Wilkins Coffee, and he would blow this thing called Sam up every time, or like he'd conk somebody over the head. Muppet was actually, Kermit was really violent before he became the sweet, lovable Muppet that we know. But yeah, at the same time, I think that Henson also never thought of the Muppets as a children's thing. He hated when the Muppets were called cute. He wanted this to be a show for adults, and in fact, the first treatment of the Muppets that was taken to England so he could find a patron was actually called Sex and Violence. That was the name of the show before he changed it to the Muppet Show. So like there's a lot there around connecting, and you see it a little bit more in Rocky 4, right, where the big toys start to interact with Polly and all these funny things that happen. And there's just this sense of and if I to really kind of go deep on it, if I was writing a paper about it, what I'd be talking about is how the Muppets bring a sense of play, which is exactly what Rocky has lost in Rocky 3 and needs to find to then be able to beat, Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T.
Oh, I thought I lost you there.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm here.
Fair enough. Hey, did you happen to see the Muppet episode, or what I forget they're called, Muppisode, called The Food Fight? Did you see that one?
It's great, yeah.
Because when I was just doing that, pedestrian Googling, I
Yes.
I wondered whether there are any boxers who had appeared in the Muppet. That's how I got to boxer shorts, if you remember last time I mentioned it. But
Yeah.
the I think one of the only episodes ever featuring a boxer, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but was Michael Buffer was the actual ring announcer for the food fight. between Gordon Ramsay and the Swedish Chef. Pretty classic moment, and that particular episode has pretty well all the characters in it. It's a pretty great encapsulation of how far the show had evolved, and who it was involving. Sorry, because I think at that point people were actually asking to be on the Muppet Show, So, but there's a piece of trivia for you. Did any other boxers ever appear, or did a boxer ever appear on the Muppet Show?
Not that I know of.
I don't think so either. Couldn't find one.
Yeah, you know what? They tended to stay away from sports personalities until the 4th and 5th season. It was hard because a lot of people were like, oh, I don't want to be on this kids show. What the hell is this? And there's a bunch of weirdos, and this is not a vehicle for me. Until about the 3rd season, when it had come into its own, and people realized that, oh my God, not only is this a great show loved by the audiences that we were trying to go after, but then it also became a vehicle for promotion and things like that, right? What I love about Food Fight is it's literally Iron Chef versus Swedish Chef. it's a great combination. But yeah, no, I don't recall, and I took a look, but I'll take a look again. I don't recall any boxers actually being in it, in the show itself, but I know that there have been kind of funny. The great thing about the Muppets in general, both Sesame Street and the core Canada Muppet Show, is that they do a lot of shorts, and I'm sure there has been. I know there's been an Elmo short parodying the Rocky films. There's been a couple different other shorts or digital shorts that they've done where a different Muppet has been in a boxing ring with something else, or I think there was one experiment that Beaker and Bunsen did that involved like boxing gloves and one of those accordion type of things that would send a punch out kind of thing. So yeah, it was pretty funny.
I know you're busy, so I'll wrap this up. But you've just reminded me of something in a kind of a weird kind of connect the dots kind of way. But in having those live celebrities go onto the Muppet Show eventually, wanting to go, requesting to go on there, because the Muppets had such wide appeal around the world. I think they were syndicated in like 100 countries. It was a massively, widely viewed show across all demographics and ages, right? So I'm saying to myself, okay, so if you're a celebrity and you're appealing to this particular demographic and you want to widen your appeal, you go on the Muppet Show. Why? Yep. So now I'm saying to myself, just as you were saying that, I wonder if that's why there's such an appeal and argument between the YouTube generation and traditional boxing fans. The traditional boxing fans don't want to see that cross-pollination between traditional boxers and, shall we call them, the YouTube boxers. And I wonder if it's that same argument that was had way back in the day. I'm not going to go on the Muppet Show. It's a show that appeals for kids. I don't need that. I'm a professional.
Yeah. Well, it's great. So in 2019, Bob Siosik, the CEO of World's Greatest, published on Medium a study of the demographics around boxing, and I think he actually mixed boxing and MMA for this particular study. But what he found was fascinating to me, right? Because when we think of boxing audiences, we think of older gentlemen, older ladies who are, kind of, it's the audience that you saw in the Rocky films, you see in the traditional films, right? They're very, they're a little bit more established. They're a little bit more in this thing. And what he found was that 41% of the audience is in that 25 to 34-year-old age group, which in modern boxing means that, and their consumption stats are incredible, right? I think I'm just taking a quick look here, but 85% of them post on Facebook, post on Netflix, or consume Netflix. 82% on YouTube, 73% on Instagram. The demo's changed, right? It is no longer this thing you just do Saturday night. Fight fans now spend time consuming all of these different ways of understanding fighters themselves, because with all that stuff, they've got a new in a way that they didn't before, right? Again, I mentioned Norman Mailer before, right? You read the paper and you learn the story of the fight. You learn a little bit about the fighter. Now you've got almost an entire profile, like I would call it a 4D profile of this fighter themselves before they ever step into the ring. And you've got stats galore and all these things that you can learn and play with, and the analytics are all available to you. And so as a result, the audience, or the way that you create an audience, has to be broader in its appeal. It has to be a way of broadening that out. I think that even the legacy fight fan, is still coming in with the same thing. What I want to see is discipline and controlled rage, if you will, or controlled power, if you will, right? And that way of hitting your marks and doing all the things that you would be watching. And ultimately, no matter how a fight is promoted, ultimately, when the bell goes off, that's what everybody's watching. And that's what they're looking for, is what kind of skill and strategy is at play in this thing, right? I liken it a lot to the movie The Queen's Gambit that became really popular on Netflix, right? What made it so popular was not all of the drama that surrounds her, but in fact, the games themselves, right? There was this sense of, in these moments, it's completely calculated inside this box. And Shoshik goes on to show that, like, boxing and MMA fans are incredibly responsive. 91% are likely to, like, or 77% likely to post. And we probably even see this a little bit in Talking Fight, right? Where just the things that you say are just going to fire off things because they want to react, they want to cheer, they want to be a part of that. Again, it goes back to that audience intimacy all the time. So I think, yeah, like the Muppets, people are looking at this going, you know what? It's time to, if the audience is there and they're watching these things and they're consuming all these things, you got to step into it and you've got to play this larger role in creating something that can be in that sphere in one way or another, right? The old quiet fighter is no longer viable as an actuality, but is viable if that quiet fighter is a character itself, is an archetype that fits into the world.
And it has to make me wonder too, whether you're now seeing that interesting difference between let's call them the young fighter and the older fighter. The younger fighter embracing social media, creating his or her own following, and if you want to take it one step beyond, to quote Madness, take a look at the opportunity now facing women in boxing. I mean, if you want to talk about breaking the mold, I mean, if you want to create a whole new audience, take it online, take it through the social media platforms you just mentioned, because there's a whole army of old school boxing generals who stick to the tried and true method of building a boxing audience through the arena, if you will, or holding these pan-national mega fights at a well-recognized casino. But at the end of the day, there are millions of boxing fans around the world who are online, who want to be engaged, and who aren't being engaged by the older boxer, but the younger generation certainly have. And among that younger generation are women. And I think they're taking advantage of it. And I think that's probably the next growth opportunity for boxing.
Oh, I'd say so, for sure. It's clearly, so in this demo study that I was reading, like, it's clearly women are the next emergence. And I think, I love that you framed it as the boxing generals, right? I think it was Sun Tzu who wrote that said, if there's a wall in front of you, have a quarter of your army distract the wall while the other, 3/4 go around it. That's exactly what's happening, right? Like, you put enough so that the generals, the old school, the whatever you want to call them, feel like, oh yeah, this thing is happening, and don't realize that around them an entire world is being built. And they won't feel that world until they themselves are beside the millennial, the Gen Xer, the Gen Yer, I guess they call them Gen Zers. I don't even know the names anymore. Right? But until they're sitting with a 12-year-old who, knows tons about the fight, knows as much as they do. It took them 30 years to learn this, and this 12-year-old has, gotten on his phone and figured out all this stuff, but understands it, can do the calculus in his head. And they're watching the fight itself, and that old general realizes, wait a minute, I'm in the same world. How did they get there as quickly that wall starts to crumble, and they realize, hey, look, yeah, you know what, we all got to be in this thing, right? Ultimately, it's about watching the things that drive the passion.
Absolutely. And therein lies the argument that the YouTubers have. And I think they're winning when it comes to where is the money, because that's ultimately what drives the sport, not necessarily the fighter, um,
Yeah.
but the sport itself. So anyway, so it's a very interesting argument to be had with respect to new versus old. Uh, Many years ago, during the .com, uh, when we were in boardrooms pitching the viability of the web, if you will, a lot of the older men and women, but a lot, let's put them in the older category, they would sit there and go, "Oh yeah, my kid just showed me," and all of a sudden, that's why they got interested, not because of anything they knew or had experienced, but it's because, well, if the kids are into it. And I remember famously, um, one of my mentors saying to me, "Well, it's amazing. I was watching my kid. On one hand, yeah, he was watching TV, but he was playing with his video games, and he was on his computer at the same time." And to my mentor John, this was mind-boggling that this younger generation could actually multitask in a fun way and be responsive. And I think that's what boxing is facing right now: a younger generation who do want that interactivity, who do not only want that close. I mean, you take a look at the traditional boxing fight. It's the tuxedo crowd who somehow have these 3 or 4 rows who are in the camera, but who is really the fan these days? Who's really paying the bill these days? And I hate to say it, but the Jake Paul and the Logan Paul generation are taking the bull by the horns and showing this boxing industry, hey man, I've got 20 million fans out there, and at $1 a pop, that's $20 million I've just made. And then they're not charging $1 a pop; they're charging a lot more. So I think as these older generals are taking charge of that now and saying, wait a sec, if there's money to be made, we need a piece of that.
I think the Jake Paul, Logan Paul guys, like their fans are looking at the tuxedo crowd saying, yeah, yeah, you sit ringside. I want to be inside the ring, right? And that's why they're buying into YouTube and buying into these other things. And yeah, I mean they're not live, but it brings them inside it in a way that those ringside seats just don't feel the same way. You see that with hockey too. You see that with a bunch of other sports. Yeah, that's fine. You have your lovely corporate seats on the out in the platinums. I want to sit where I can yell and that's actually why the bar culture of the pay-per-view fight has actually really gotten so much more popular in recent years, right? Because it allows you to have that shared experience. I was at a bar, I can't remember what it was I was watching. It wasn't boxing, but it was a sporting event. But like there was the main sporting event going on, but then other screens had additional statistics and other things going on. And as a sports fan, I was going mad because this is the stuff that I would have been on my phone for. But these guys had figured out that rather than having people on their phone and not going to the bar buying drinks and doing things while they're watching this, I'll put it up. I'll put it all up, and they'll interact with this in all of these ways, as you say, right? And I mean, that's what it comes down to: is old keys don't open up new doors.
Woo, zinger. Well done, Randy. And hey, listen, let me take this opportunity to thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Um, I think the viewers out there are going to love your insight as well and what you've had to say. It's really important to know that boxing is on this cusp of change, uh, and the younger generation have figured it out, and the older generation are still, how do I figure this out? So you pointed out some really interesting points, quite frankly, that make an awful lot of sense, not only to me but to the viewership. So thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to come back anytime, and I will send you guys the links so that you can post up the links to the two studies that I referenced in your comments in case anybody wants
Thank
to
you.
do a little additional reading.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Randy. Appreciate it, and have yourself a good day.
Awesome. Thanks. Take care.